So we're here with Councilor Gord Perks. I guess we'll start with just general questions. What do you think has been the biggest change since you have taken office in your ward?
Oh, that's hard to say. I suppose the thing that we've concentrated on the most is improving the quality of public spaces. One of the things I think that makes Toronto a really great city is instead of all of us having private castles, we have a beautiful common space. When I took over as councillor for Ward 14, a lot of the streets, civic squares and parks were in pretty rough shape. They hadn't seen good investment. So we've been on a deliberate program of creating a group that is a friends of each park that we have. And those different friends of groups have worked with the city and made them really beautiful, really inviting, really engaging. And we've also taken some of the main streets in the ward, like Jameson and Roncesvalles, and really given them a big facelift. Roncesvalles we redesigned completely, so it's now much more transit and cycling focused than automobile focused. And I'm a bit chuffed about this. The New York Times actually called it one of the best strolls in the city of Toronto. So we've done that. And on Jameson we have what I think is Canada's largest outdoor photo exhibit. On all the tree planter boxes we have pictures of people who live on Jameson, taken by people who live on Jameson. And it just gives a sense of community in the public realm that builds a neighborhood.
A recent report into Toronto's quality of life ranks the neighborhoods in Toronto. This has been called the neighborhood improvement, this is called priority neighborhoods, and it was to replace a strategy introduced in 2006 called the neighborhood improvement area. How do you think the changes brought in from priority neighborhoods to replace neighborhood improvement area has changed the way we invest in the city?
So when we did the original priority neighborhood program, it was designed around what we call inputs. So we looked at different neighborhoods and said, is there a library, is there a community center? And if the answer was no, we decided to invest to give those resources to each neighborhood. What we do now is we look at outputs, the health of the people in the community, their access to education and services, and how all of those things affect the quality of life. So it was a measurement of people's lives rather than a measurement of what services were available. By doing that, we've recognized that some areas, even where there are services available, are still not having the kind of outcomes we want. People aren't getting as much education as we would hope. People aren't as healthy as we would hope. So a neighborhood like Parkdale, where we already had a good library and a good community center, we've recognized we aren't getting the health outcomes we want, so we're going to make more investments there.
In working with the province, it's not just education, obviously. When it comes to TTC, how is it, what challenges do you face in advocating for better transit in your ward at the provincial level?
So 10 years ago, we had a financial arrangement, actually it's more than 10 years now. We had a financial arrangement with the province that gave us a fixed percentage of the day-to-day operations for transit that the province would cover, and a fixed percentage we would cover, and a fixed percentage that would come out of the fare box. That's gone. So now, it actually costs the city a lot of money every time we get a new transit rider. So that makes it hard because the province isn't helping us with that anymore. We also had an arrangement where the province would pay 3/4 of the cost for the big moves, building new streetcar lines, buying new buses, buying subway cars, fixing up the stations, those things we call the capital projects. Now we have to go and fight for table scraps each time we want to make one of those big moves, and it makes transit planning and the regular delivery of the services that we have very difficult to do. So even though we're experiencing an unprecedented population boom, 50,000 people a year moving to Toronto, we don't have the resources to either buy the infrastructure that they need or to operate it. It's making Toronto a less livable city, and it's making those of us who rely on transit. I don't even have a driver's license. Very frustrated. The unfortunate thing is that the city keeps putting in more money, but the province isn't there.
In 2011, City Council scrapped a $60 fee, the vehicle registration fee. You were very vocal in advocating for that fee not to go away. How has the loss of that revenue affected your ward?
So, losing $40 million or $50 million a year, it's in that range, is the equivalent of a 2% property tax increase. But we haven't had that 2% property tax increase, so the money has to come from somewhere. And where it's come from is programs and services. For a year or two, we lost free recreation programs for adults in Parkdale High Park at our Mazurk Cowan Community Center. Because, as you pointed out, it's a priority neighborhood or a neighborhood action area. That meant that an awful lot of people who couldn't afford to join a private gym and probably don't have a big apartment where they can put exercise equipment got less healthy. Now, we've been able to reverse that decision, but if we hadn't been, that would have meant even worse health outcomes for a very important population in Parkdale. We've also seen less investment in public spaces, as we discussed, and less frequency of transit service. So the Dundas streetcar that I take every day, I wait longer, and when it arrives, there's no seat. Often on my way home, I'll have to let 2 streetcars go by, no matter how cold it is, because they're just packed and you can't even get on. So the quality of the services that make our neighborhoods work had to suffer so that the mayor could make a claim about putting money back in people's pockets. Well, if the money's in people's pockets, it's not buying the services that make the neighborhoods that we live in great places to live.
Have there been any proposals to kind of get that revenue back regenerated?
One of the unfortunate things about being in government is that if a majority of council doesn't believe in a good idea, the good idea doesn't move forward. We don't have a majority of city councillors who would be in favor of putting the vehicle registration fee back on. So we languish. We scrabble to try to find savings in all the different departments, and some services get worse. I'm hearing more and more from people that they're less concerned about their tax rate than they are about the services that are fraying around the edges and making the quality of life less comfortable throughout the city, not just in Parkdale High Park.
The recent purchase of the Bixie Bike Corporation by Toronto, the City of Toronto, are you expecting the amount of people who ride their bikes or just use the service to increase?
We're sort of at one of those tipping points that people talk about all the time in terms of bike use in Toronto. We don't have quite enough bike riders to really reallocate the scarce physical space on our main streets so that we get protected bikeways and have to take out parking, for example. But we have so many bike riders that it's becoming unsafe. The big move that's going to have to be made during this generation of politics is to cross over that threshold and say, well, parking has to give way, or well, a travel lane on a main street has to give way. It's going to be a very difficult political conversation to have, but it's inevitable and it's coming. Until that conversation happens, and until we succeed in giving over part of that precious street space to bicycles, expanding Bixie outside of the small central core is not really going to work, because you don't have the volume of people who would take a bike from High Park to downtown to justify the cost.
How do you see bike lanes as being a good solution to increase bike ridership in the city?
Yeah, you know, I have to confess, I'm a bit of a daydreamer. I work out public policy questions in my head as I travel. It's probably safer that I do that on a streetcar than I do while I'm riding on a bike. If there were better bike infrastructure, a guy like me could safely ride without, getting doored. Until we have that infrastructure, the percentage of people who are going to safely bike feel comfortable and safe biking to work or biking to go meet some friends is going to stay relatively low. When we do get around to building that infrastructure after the painful political conversation, then the percentage will go up a lot higher.
What are some of the challenges in trying to update our old infrastructure that was built in the 50s and 30s that's now kind of crumbling and becoming insufficient?
So the basic infrastructure in an older city like Toronto was probably built with federal and provincial money, mostly. And one of the very important changes, the sort of tectonic changes that's under the surface in Canadian politics in the last 15, 20, 30 years has been that the federal and provincial governments don't pay for that stuff as much anymore. Now we have to pay for it through the municipality. The problem is that the way the municipality collects money can't really handle those big programs the way that the income tax provides a whole lot of money that grows with the economy to the federal and provincial governments. So we're running really fast to catch up, but we can't do it with the revenue tools that we've got. We need either the federal government and the provincial government to take back part of the transit funding and housing funding that they've downloaded on us, or we need one more revenue tool. And the suggestion has been that we should get a share of the sales tax if we're going to pay for that infrastructure. But while we haven't got either of those tools, the upload of housing and transit or the new revenue tool, we simply can't afford to keep up with the infrastructure demands that have been downloaded on us.
How do you think we can deal with our community or manage our community housing corporation better?
Well, there are two fundamental pieces. The first piece is when the federal and provincial governments dumped their housing on us, they didn't provide the money for the repairs. If you own a building, you're going to put aside a little bit of money every year so that when the roof leaks or the boiler breaks, you've got the money on hand to pay for it. They gave us the housing with all the structural wear and tear, but without those savings that would have allowed us to keep up with the capital repairs. So there's a money problem. We don't have enough money, and we can't collect enough money in rent from the people who live in community housing to keep up with the backlog of repairs that we inherited. So that problem has to be fixed. It doesn't matter who's running the corporation. If there's not enough money to keep the buildings in great shape, then there's going to be a problem. So that's one. We need to solve the financial arrangement between the city and the province and the federal government on housing. We're the only country pretty much in the developed world that doesn't have a federal housing strategy, and that shows in the quality of the buildings. One thing though that's worth remembering is that community housing, despite that problem, is still a better place to live than most of the private rental that's out there for the same population base and the same price point. The second thing to remember is that how you arrange your organizational chart or who's in charge of the organization is not as important as having a dedicated group of people who work there. Toronto Community Housing is home to 164,000 people. No one person is going to be able to provide great service to 164,000 tenants. They're just not able to do it. You need a culture that trains and respects the frontline workers, the janitors, the community health workers, the superintendents, the attendant care providers who are helping to look after the seniors in the senior buildings, that feels confident and well respected. During this term of office, our mayor actually was actively hostile to the frontline workers delivering services to Toronto Community Housing, and put all his money on putting a big personal savior in charge. Well, that can't work. No one person can deal with the needs of 164,000 tenants. We need to get back to believing in the institution and the public servants who manage the institution and provide services, instead of thinking about where the next great savior is going to come from.
what do you think is the best solution for the gardener?
What do I think is the best solution for the gardener? Well, my inclination is to take down the eastern end of it. The issue becomes what you replace it with and what kind of money you have for dealing with it. So we looked at the first 3 or 4 options that city staff provided and said, you know what, there's probably a little bit more work you guys can do here on a hybrid option where we take part of it down, but we still deal with the connection between the Don Valley Parkway and the garden, which is a lifeline for a lot of people. I want to see that new hybrid option before I make my final choice, but my preference is always to try to get rid of controlled access freeways in the middle of a city. I don't think they're good for a city's health.
If in 2 years ago it came to light that there was a GE Hitachi uranium processing plant just south of your ward, many residents, many nearby residents were unaware of this plant. How do we fix the disconnect between, I guess, City Hall and corporations, or City Hall and the people, when it comes to, knowing about these things in their wards?
So one of the things I worked on when I was in the environmental movement before I got here is community right to know legislation. You have the right to know what goes on in your neighborhood that might be impacting the local environment and your health. We have some of those tools now at the City of Toronto, but it's important to remember the municipal government doesn't really have the authority to say this kind of plant is allowed and that kind of plant is allowed. As long as they're meeting all the federal and provincial requirements, we can't really chase them out. In terms of the GE Hitachi plant, the real issue is that we continue to be a heavily nuclear society. We oughtn't be. We should be getting off our reliance on nuclear power, and that's a discussion that the public really has to have with the other orders of government.
Are we being kicked out?
Gordon, you're late for your 12.
Oh, okay, I gotta get going?
Thank you.
You get what you need?
Yep.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much.